Numbers going?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. We're going into our last session here. This is a session that we're going to be talking about Mary Magdalene. Then I have a few words to conclude with. And that will be our day today. So, of all the women of the Gospels, probably none of them have received more confusing, disputed, fabricated, and conflicting press than Mary Magdalene. Mary Ann Beavis of Baylor University writes of Mary, her importance is signified by the fact that in the list of female disciples, she always is mentioned first, except for one exception. And that is amazing, and it shows us something about Mary. The same way that Peter's listed in the list of the apostles is usually first, there's significance there. And so, but what about Mary? What are some of the things that, what is some of the confusion about her? Let me just straighten out a little bit of it now. First, it's her name. Some people think that Magdalene means strength, and it's compared to like a strong tower. But actually, it is from just simply the place where she was from. She was Mary of Magdala, or Mary of Migdal. And you can actually, I don't know if you can flip to the next slide here, you can actually visit Migdal. I've been there. They found a first century synagogue there as they were clearing out a hospice for people to stay. Their first dig into the ground to try to clear the ground, they hit rock, and they realized the rock was not bedrock, it was actually from a first century synagogue. So they had to stop all of their building at that point and excavate the land, and then they had to build their hospice on a different part of the land because they discovered the first century village there. And this is the synagogue there. They even had a replica of the ark in the middle of the synagogue. So we could go back to the other slide now. But that shows that this is Mary of Migdal. This is Mary, and that was just south of Capernaum. It was a small little village that was actually known for pickling fish. Great pickled fish from the village of Migdal. So they would catch the fish in Capernaum. They would just send it down the lake a little bit, and it would be pickled there in Migdal. And that was where she's from. She's also, second, she's been confused as being the prostitute, and especially in connection with the sinful woman. And it's crazy how all of this came about, but I'll go into a few of the details there. First, she's never mentioned as a prostitute in the Bible. She's mentioned as being demonized, having 7 demons. And yes, she did have 7 demons, but she was never given that specific label as prostitute in the Bible. She's been connected with Luke chapter 7 because, and here's the crazy thing, because Luke 7 was connected with John chapter 12, and then John chapter 12, Mary comes up next. And also there was confusion with Mary of Bethany, John 12, being Mary Magdalene. And there was one point, a pronouncement by the Catholic Church that Mary of Bethany and Mary of Magdalene were the same person. And they were all this sinful woman. So these 2 characters were merged into one character. And Mary Magdalene was just stuck with that label for centuries until the Catholic Church decided that, you know what, we've got that wrong, and they took it back. There are actually 2 women, and one is Mary of Bethany, one is Mary Magdalene. And their stories are not the same stories. Mary Ann Beavis, again, at Baylor University, writes, it was not until 591 that Pope Gregory the Great authoritatively pronounced that Luke's sinner, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene were one and the same. Okay, that would happen in 591. Although Gregory did not actually call her a prostitute, he interpreted the 7 demons of which had been exorcised as the totality of the vices, and asserted that the anointment she used to anoint Jesus' feet had previously been used as her perfume for sensual purposes. Subsequently, the legend of Mary Magdalene and the sister of Mary and Lazarus as a beautiful yet vain and lustful woman, saved from a life of sin by her devotion to Jesus, became dominant in Western Catholic Christianity. Although the Eastern Church continued to regard Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany as distinct saints and identified neither of them with Luke's sinner. And so the Eastern Orthodox Church got it right at that point, but the Catholic Church did not. Another writer says, in 597, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon, on Luke's Gospel in which he combined Mary Magdalene with Mary of Bethany, Martha's sister, suggesting this Mary was the same woman who wept at Jesus' feet in Luke 7, and that one of the 7 demons Jesus exorcised her, one of the 7 demons he exorcised was the demon of sexual immorality. The idea caught on and was perpetuated in medieval art and literature, and often portrayed Mary as weeping, penitential prostitute. In fact, the English word maudlin, meaning weak and sentimental, finds its derivation in this distorted image of Mary Magdalene, maudlin. In 1969, the Vatican formally restated the Gospel's distinction between Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, and the sinful woman in Luke 7. So it went on from 597 all the way to 1969. And then it says they reinstated this distinction between the three, and then the author adds this, and I love this. Although it seems that Martin Scorsese, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and Mel Gibson have yet to receive the memo. And many others as well, because Mary is still thought of in so many people's mind as the sinful woman of Luke 7, when actually there is no connection there between the two. And besides that, there's been confusing conspiracy theories about Mary over the years. Started actually very soon after Jesus, and really during the middle of the 2nd century, even when the Gnostics started writing things about Mary, like she was a secret disciple and she had more understanding than the other disciples. And in certain pseudepigraphal gospels, Peter saying such things like, Jesus, you need to get rid of that woman because women shouldn't be amongst us, that kind of thing. And so there are all these things that were said about Mary very early on, continuing on to the idea that Mary actually was the lover of Jesus, that they had a child together, that Mary took the child with her to France and raised him in France. And if you've seen Dan Brown and some of his the movies about him, with Tom Hanks, then you understand some of that. So all of these things that have been written about her, but those things we need to clear up and just get out of our mind, because honestly, when you think of Mary Magdalene and are guided by the text, she is a devoted disciple of Jesus, the first of the women mentioned of Jesus' followers, and she was there at the tomb. She was received a personal pronouncement of the risen Jesus, the first to announce that Jesus has risen, and was not only a follower of Jesus, but a supporter of his ministry. She and other women went with Jesus, and from their own funds, sponsored and supported the ministry of Jesus. And so, in that sense, we just need to try to push aside some of the things that create a lack of clarity and understand who Mary really was and appreciate her for who she was and what she did. She was Mary of Magdala, or Migdal, from a small fishing village just south of Galilee. She also was one of the supporters of Jesus, and you can find this in Matthew 27, and it's actually in each of the synoptic gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about her in that way. Many women were also there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to serve him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So many women, but Mary is listed first among those many women. And she sponsored the ministry of Jesus. there's questions of how she got her money. That is totally conjecture, how she might have gotten her money. It could easily have been that Mary, because of the being demonized, had been married to someone, and this person divorced her, but he also left her with money. Or she could have been a widow, and having been a widow, received the money from her husband. And so how she got her money, we just don't know, and we shouldn't try to figure that out. Instead, we should just accept that Jesus helped her. And again, we got this beautiful dance of grace that we talked about from the very first lesson yesterday. She received the grace of Jesus being exorcised of these 7 demons. Therefore, she has gratitude in her heart for Jesus, and then she is generous in her life and serves Jesus in a generous way. Grace, gratitude, generosity. This beautiful dance of grace is very evident in the life of Mary. Another thing you can see about Mary is that she did have demons cast out of her, but it says in Luke 8, 2 and 3, there also were some women who had been healed of evil spirits and diseases. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who was Herod's steward, Susanna, and many others. These women helped support Jesus and his apprentices out of their possessions. So it's not just Mary alone who was ill or had demons, it was the other women as well, and yet sometimes she is the one that's pointed out. In the longer ending of Mark's gospel, he does note, after Jesus had risen on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. But so the fact was that she did have the demons, and Jesus cast them out, and then you had that dance of grace and gratitude and generosity. Another point about Mary is she was one of the ones at the foot of the cross. And in John 9:25, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother's sisters, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And that's the one instance in which she doesn't appear first in the list. It's the mother of Jesus that appears first, and the family of Jesus that appears first in the list. And then another point, a 5th point, is Mary Magdalene and a few other women are witnesses of the burial of Jesus. And remember the tomb. These women, they were the brave ones at this point because they actually stick around. And Mary is one of the ones that sticks around to try to see, okay, what are they going to do with his body? And so they notice the place where Jesus was buried. And they take note of that, and they keep that in their mind. They go back and they prepare spices, and they go on Sunday morning in order to anoint Jesus for burial. And you see this, that Mary Magdalene was one of the ones who was there for that. So she goes, this is the 6th point, she goes to the tomb on Sunday morning to anoint Jesus. In Luke 14, verse 8, that must be 24, I'm sorry, verse 8, or verse 1, verse 8. They remembered his words, they returned to the tombs and reported all these things to the 12 and to the rest. Mary Magdalene was there, as were Joanna and Mary, the mother of James. The other women were also with them. They reported these things to the apostles, but their words appeared to them as nonsense, and they did not believe them. Peter stood up and ran to the tomb. He stooped over and looked inside and saw only a linen cloth. He went away to his home, marveling at these events. The women were there at the cross. They were the first at the tomb. They were the first to report the words of Jesus being the risen Lord. And Mary was there with them, and Mary was there to give the first report. And so, to me, it's when I look at the close of the life of Jesus, and I think especially of the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection, what you see there in that scene, really, you see the strength of the women there in that scene. Because it's the women that are there at the cross. It is the women that are there looking out and seeing where he's buried. It's the women there who go to honor Jesus on Sunday morning after his burial. It's the women, and Mary Magdalene specifically, that the angel says, he's not here, he's risen. And then it's the women who run to the upper room and proclaim the risen Lord. And their word is first received as nonsense by the disciples until Peter runs out and sees for himself that Jesus truly is risen. And I just want to say that I appreciate in that time how it was the women who led the way. And it was the women who were really the last at the cross, lingered around to see the burial, the first at the tomb, and the first to announce the resurrection. And I want to connect that with how so often in my journey as well, I've seen women that have just been out front, serving God, showing us the way, being people of faith. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that in my own life. When I think about the faith that I've seen in my wife Lee, or the faith that I see in my daughter Chelsea, or the faith that I see in faithful women like Deb, like Teresa, like Stacy Fridley, like Sissy Hansen. I could go on and on. But I appreciate so much the women and what they do for Jesus, the way that they serve and they lead and they stand out in service and in love and in dedication and in faith and in devotion. And what I wanted to do in a small way in going through the women of the Bible over the last 2 days, I wanted in a small way just to highlight how sometimes we've overlooked the contribution of women in the Gospels. And I think that corresponds to how at times we've overlooked the contribution of women in the church. And that shouldn't happen. There are times where I feel like that we need to do a better job nurturing the gifts of the women in the church, but also the women, letting them and allowing them and giving them space and giving them opportunities and giving them a venue to be able to use their gifts for God in the church. And this is something that I feel like we need to take a look at and we need to evaluate. For me, as I mentioned yesterday, it's just simply a matter of social justice and fairness more than anything. At least half of our church is women. I mean, it just is. Usually more. At least half of the leadership in the church, it's women. And so we have to figure out ways for us to see them nurtured in their gifts and in the use of their gifts to be able to serve God in a great way in the church. And some things I won't really get into it, but I just have made it a point in my own life that when I see instances in which I feel like that I look up and I see, this is all guys here. Where are the sisters? Where are the women? I just made it a point in my own life to speak up and say, where are the women? And I won't get into all the details, but I've done this numerous times now. Every time I look at a video, for example, whether it's from wherever it is, I look up and I say, where are the women? And then I'll write, did you know that you did not include a single sister in that video? I think you need to do better than that. And so I just want you to know, and that's nothing great on my part, it's just something I've noticed. And it's a way that I feel like I need to just speak up, and I need to let my voice be heard with this. Because the fact is that I think it's really sad. One of the saddest notes in the Bible to me is when the women come to that upper room so excited So excited because Jesus has risen. And the brothers hear what they say and they treat it as nonsense. To me, that is one of the saddest notes in the Bible. And as a church, we cannot be that way at all. And so I'm hoping that even just by talking about the women of the Bible, it will allow us to try to look and see, okay, how are we doing with all of this, and what can we do better with all of this? And I invite you to come up and talk to me if you have suggestions about this type of thing. In Mark's longer ending there in the Gospel of Mark, and I say that because there is a shorter ending and there is a longer ending of Mark, it was Mary who was the first to witness the resurrection on Sunday. And it was Mary who is the one that Jesus sends to the disciples to announce his resurrection there. And so when you look at that, you see the prominent place that Jesus put on Mary there in the longer ending of Mark. And let me see where I want to close out here. Let me just conclude in this way. First off, let me say thanks for coming. It's been a great 2 days for me personally. I appreciate so much all of you wanting to learn and wanting to dig a little deeper. I also appreciate your hearts and your desire to learn more about this very important topic that we've been considering over the last couple of days. And I appreciate your being willing to stay this long and even have to face the snow after we conclude this. I also appreciate the sisters that have shared, and I think that's been a great part of what we have done. So, thanks to the sisters who have shared. And I just wanted to close with a few words here. In the early church and today's church and the world around us, we need to recognize the crucial role that women have played in the history of the Bible and in the history of the ministry of Jesus and in the history of Paul's ministry and the history of the church. Consider this: Sarah, the mother of faith in Genesis, the songwriter and the prophet Miriam in Exodus, the judge and military commander Deborah in Judges, the prophet Huldah in the book of Kings, the bold, courageous Jair in Judges, the prayerful and faithful Hannah in 1 Samuel, the wise woman of Tekoa in 1 Kings, the Shunammite woman, widow, in 1 Kings, the young captive who told Naaman's wife about a prophet in Israel in 2 Kings. Also, the Proverbs woman of virtue in Proverbs chapter 31. The courageous Esther, and Ruth, the Eshet Hayel, the woman of strength and valor. Also, there are women who are silent because, unfortunately, they've been silenced in the scripture. The Levite concubine in Judges 19, Bathsheba in 2 Samuel, Tamar in 2 Samuel. And we need to consider what happened in those situations. And in the ministry of Jesus, we find great examples of faith, as we've seen these last 2 days. Anna the prophet, Elizabeth the mother of John the Immerser, Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary and Martha of Bethany, Joanna, the unnamed Samaritan woman, the unnamed Syrophoenician woman, the unnamed widow with her 2 mites, the unnamed sinful woman who anoints Jesus, the women who were there at the foot of the cross, the women who were there and spotted the tomb, the women who were there on Sunday morning and then looked at the empty tomb, the women who were first to announce the resurrection of the Lord. And throughout the New Testament, we find women who help establish and expand the early church. There's Tabitha or Dorcas from Joppa. They're the daughters of Philip in Caesarea. There's Prisca, Priscilla in Corinth and Rome. There's Junia in Rome. There's Phoebe and Cenchrea, and later in Rome when she delivered Paul's letter to the church in Rome. There's Chloe in Corinth and the church in her house. There are the women who prayed and prophesied in Corinth. There's Euodia and Syntyche, Paul's fellow workers in Philippi. There's Lydia in Philippi and the church that met in her house. There's Nympha in Colossae and the church that met in her house. There's Lois and Eunice in Lystra, and many, many others, many who are unnamed and remain anonymous. In the early church, there are heroic examples of women like Perpetua and Felicity, martyrs for Jesus. This is only a partial list of the many women of the Bible. A survey of the Bible reveals that there are 93 women mentioned in the Bible. 43 are mentioned by name. The Bible contains 1.1 million words. Only 14,056 words are attributed to women. This demonstrates that the women of the Bible were often characters in the background. But this does not mean that they went unnoticed by God or Jesus. In fact, Jesus often made note of women in his ministry, spotlighting them for their service. He broke the taboos of social convention and spoke to women and included them in his ministry as a rabbi. This is one of the many reasons that women were drawn to Jesus. As Dorothy Sayers says, and I read this to begin the class yesterday, I'll close today with this, the words of Dorothy Sayers. Perhaps it is no wonder that the women were the first at the cradle and the last at the cross. They had never known a man like this man. There had never been such another, a prophet and a teacher who never nagged about them, who never flattered or coaxed or patronized them, who never made arch jokes about them, who never treated them as the woman, God help us, or the ladies, God bless them, who rebuked without querulousness and praised without condescension, who took their questions and arguments seriously, who never mapped out their sphere for them, never urged them to be feminine and jeered at them as being female, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious. There is no act, no sermon, no parable in the whole of the Gospels that borrows its pungency from female perversity. Nobody could possibly guess from the words and deeds of Jesus that there was anything funny about women's nature. And I appreciate so much that Jesus was this way with women. And it shows us today that this is how we need to be in the church also. Because Jesus is the example of how each of us as disciples need to be. But he's also is the example of how we as a church need to be. And so I thank Jesus for the way that he pushed us through the barriers and disdained social conventions in order for us to see the value of women and to treat women with value. And I hope that from these past 2 days, we've been able to note that about Jesus, but then note so many other things about women, the character of women, the faith of women, especially these women in the Gospels. Thank you.